What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton's telemetry data in the Spanish GP not only reveals that the Ferrari is slower, but could confirm that it is broken from its design? Stay, because what you will discover below can completely change the perception of the Ferrari 2025 project. In the first glance, Ferrari's performance during the 2025 Grand Prix did not generate scandalous headlines. There was no abandonment, not an engine failure or a clamorous strategy error. But that apparent normality is precisely what makes what was revealed more disturbing when analyzing the technical data of the SF25. Because under that superficial calm, which exposed telemetry, GPS and sector analysis by sector, is a background problem, much more serious than could suggest a discrete result. From the outside, the weekend of Lewis Hamilton could be perceived as one of adaptation. But when analyzing raw data, it was clear that the 7-time world champion was not simply struggling to find the rhythm with his new team, but fighting against a car that had wrong aerodynamic foundations. Telemetry showed that, in several areas of Montmello, Hamilton suffered important aerodynamic load losses just in the curves where I needed it most. We are not talking about thousands. We talk about constant tenths accumulated by the instability of the rear axle, due to a poorly channeled airflow in the pontoons and by a structural base in the soil of the car that failed to generate consistent adhesion. The Barcelona-Catalunya circuit is known for being a fire test for cars, especially in aerodynamic terms. Its combination of high and medium speed curves with constant direction changes demands a balanced car and with a stable platform. And this is where the SF25 failed flagrantly. In the technical sectors, especially the second, with the linked curves of the middle part, the Ferrari was nervous, reagent, unable to maintain a clean path without the pilot having to make constant corrections behind the wheel. Hamilton, accustomed to cars with a rear axle that gave him confidence to push, found a platform that responded with inaccuracy every time he tried to force the rhythm. The engineers, when reviewing the data after the session, identified what became the center of Maranello's internal debate. The aerodynamic flow around the flat background and the sides was generating vortices that destabilized the car. The design introduced by 2025, which sought to optimize aerodynamic efficiency at the expense of greater setup sensitivity, ended up creating an operating window so reduced that only in perfect conditions could offer competitive performance. And the perfect conditions do not exist in the modern Formula One. This act shows us that the greatest threat to Ferrari in this season is not at the speed of Red Bull or McLaren, but in the conceptual rigidity of its own design. Because while other equipment has designed versatile cars that tolerate temperature variations, fuel or tire load, Ferrari seems to have fallen again in the technical complexity trap. They have built a machine that, when it is not exactly at its optimal point, it becomes unpredictable, nervous and slow. The SF25, instead of being a step forward with respect to its predecessor, could already be demonstrating in the 5th race that is a project with a structural error in its conception itself. And this completely changes the narrative, because it is no longer about waiting for Hamilton to adapt, or that the team finds the ideal configuration. It is about understanding if there is a realistic short-term solution for a car that, in essence, can be broken from its DNA. In this second part of the story, the figure of Lewis Hamilton acquires an even more revealing dimension. Because beyond what the final positions reflect, what happened between the British and the Ferrari SF25 in the Barcelona circuit was a real technical struggle, silent, but brutal. The confrontation between the pure talent of one of the best pilots of all time and a machine that refuses to cooperate. Hamilton is no stranger to adversity. He has worked with unbalanced cars, has won championships in changing conditions, and has managed to evolve as a pilot to adapt to the technical demands of each era. But what he faced in Spain was different. This time, it was not enough to adapt its piloting. This time, every effort to find time on track seemed returned with an invisible penalty, where flying, lack of traction. The SF25 did not respond as it should, and the pilot was forced to reinvent himself, curve. One of the most dramatic aspects of data analysis was the way in which Hamilton had to modify his braking style and curve entry. Accustomed for years to cars with good rear load that allowed him an aggressive entry with minimal correction, in Barcelona he had to adopt a more conservative approach. The accelerator began to release before and delay the brake transition, lengthening the input phase to maintain stability. A more similar style to his partner Leclerc, more compatible with a nervous car in the rear, but that compromises the total rhythm per round. This, by itself, already speaks of the ability to adapt the British. But the most striking thing is that, even so, it managed to match or overcome in some sectors the times of Leclerc. It was not because the car would improve. It was because Hamilton squeezed until the last technical resort at his disposal. However, that effort had consequences. The wear of the front tires was significantly higher in its stints, particularly during the middle batches. Under normal conditions, a car with a good balance should uniformly distribute wear between the axes. In the case of SF25, the attempt to compensate for the lack of rear support ended up forcing the front tires beyond their comfort zone. Another worrying detail arose from the paths and micro-corrections. In long curves such as 3 or 9, Hamilton had to make small but constant corrections at the wheel. This is not only a sign of bad dynamic behavior of the car, but also a cumulative source of loss of time. Each correction interrupts the natural flow of acceleration and adds thermal stress to the tires. And in a circuit as sensitive as Barcelona, that translates into tense by return that accumulate until you take off the head group. Even from the communication point of view, the tension was perceived. The radios between Hamilton and his engineer during the sessions were more frequent than usual, with the pilot asking for immediate adjustments, commenting on the unpredictability of the car or questioning the logic of certain setup decisions. It was not free frustration. He was a world champion, realizing in real time that the car that had to give him his 8th title was not only up to height, but was conditioned by a design that did not allow maneuver. The logical and brutal conclusion of everything that happened in the Spain Grand Prix does not point to a simple need for adjustments, even to a learning curve between pilot and car. The signals are deeper, more alarming, and directly compromise the present and immediate future of the Ferrari Scuderia. Because when the problem is no longer in the box or in the configuration, not even in the adaptation of the pilot, then it only remains to look towards the root of the project. And that route is the SF25, a car that, according to what the data in Barcelona showed, can be conceptually wrong. In modern Formula One, success margins are so small that a bad decision in the base design can condemn an entire season before this crossing even its first third. Ferrari knows. And yet, it seems to have recounted in one of its most repeated structural errors, designing a car with an operational window so narrow that its optimal performance can only be achieved in almost utopian conditions. This converts every race weekend into a technical lottery, where the margin of error is null and any small diversion of temperature, humidity, or load level can convert the SF25 into an unrecognizable car. The immediate involvement of this is devastating. If the soil design, the air flows around the pontoons, and the general balance of the car are bad since its conception, the solutions are not found in a new spoiler specification or in a diffuser review. Structural reviews are required. Chassis changes. Redesign of the aerodynamic concept. Interventions that, in practice, are not feasible in the middle of a season without sacrificing continuous development and the budgetary stop imposed by the technical regulations. For Ferrari, this means that they are not only losing ground in front of McLaren and Mercedes, which already demonstrated a more aggressive and effective rhythm of evolution. It also means that they could enter a spiral in which technical patches only delay an inevitable reconstruction. Each update that is introduced on a defective platform will only serve to turn off momentary fires, without solving the fire that burns at the base of the car. And that fire consumes trust, energy, and time. The most worrying thing is that this technical crisis could have a domino effect. Because if the team begins to focus on redesigned structural elements, the development of the car for the second half of the season is automatically committed. And if the focus moves prematurely to the 2026 car, the present competitive is completely sacrificed. This without the collateral damage that this can generate in the morale of the team, in the relationship between its pilots, and in the external perception of sponsors and fans waiting for a winning project. And then there is the impact on the figure of Lewis Hamilton. A pilot who opted for his legacy in his last years of career to a project that promised to return him to the top. A pilot who arrived with the expectation of finding a competitive car, but has encountered a wall of technical limitations that neither his huge talent can overcome on his own. And now, after everything analyzed, an inevitable reflection arises. What Hamilton data revealed in the Spain Grand Prix is not simply a set of statistics or one more technical diagnosis. It is a shout of alert. It is an empirical proof that something essential is not working within Ferrari. Because if one of the best pilots in history with all their experience, talent, and adaptation capacity cannot extract the performance of the SF25 even in a circuit that clearly exposes the technical behavior of the cars, then the problem goes far beyond the steering wheel. This scenario raises background questions that Ferrari must face without excuses or rodeos. Does it make sense to continue refining details when the base is incorrect? Can the team redesign its philosophy mid-season without mortgaging its present performance? And how much more time Hamilton will be willing to load with a project that, for now, does not give him what he needs to compete for his 8th championship? These questions are not trivial. They have direct implications in technical development, sports management, and internal stability of one of the most iconic F1 teams. In addition, what happened in Montmello puts the performance of the other teams in perspective. While McLaren continues to build on the solid basis of his builder's title in 2024, and Mercedes gives recovery signs with a George Russell increasingly strengthened, Ferrari seems arrested in a dynamic of constant reinvention, but without clear direction. The other shields evolve, Ferrari reacts. And in Formula One, who reacts is always one step back. Therefore, the real race is not against Red Bull, nor against McLaren, even against the stopwatch. It is against time and inertia. Against the possibility of letting an entire generation pass without titles, while other teams consolidate their domain. It is against the risk that this new chapter with Hamilton that should be the definitive rebirth of the Scuderia ends up being just another failed stage in the recent history of Maranello. So I leave you with this open question. Do you think Ferrari has room to reverse this structural problem before it is too late? Or are we witnessing the beginning of a new lost cycle for the most legendary motor racing?